Today, I'm bringing you a story so powerful it feels carved from dust, iron, and sacrifice, set in the heart of the Old West, where the sun burns high and the wind carries secrets across open land. This is a world of iron rails, loaded rifles, and men who believe they own the law. A place where destiny doesn't knock, it charges straight at you. It began with a single witness in the wrong place at the wrong time. A moment that should have faded into the night, but instead ignited a reckoning no one could stop. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. In the Old West, loyalty was never proven by promises. It was proven by who stood with you when the train was already on the way. The desert sun scorched the steel rails stretching toward Copper Ridge, heat shimmering above the tracks. 5 armed men waited on one side, rifles loose in their hands, dust clinging to their coats, smirks carved deep into their faces. They were the crew led by Sorn Vell, killers who had ruled the Arizona Territory through fear for 3 relentless years. Across the rails stood 4 more men, equally armed, members of Blaine Crowfax's rotten posse, lawmen in name only, badges sold for profit and blood. Between the two groups, bound tight to the iron rails, lay 63-year-old Ridge Halver. His face was lined by time and hardship, yet it carried no panic, only the calm resolve of a man who had faced death more than once and accepted whatever came next. The ropes bit into his wrists, but he made no attempt to pull free. His pale eyes stayed locked on the horizon, where a column of black smoke climbed into the empty sky. The train was coming. Sorn Vell pulled out his pocket watch and let out a harsh laugh, the sound dry and metallic. 20 minutes, old man, he said. 20 minutes until the Santa Fe 315 wipes you off these tracks. He spat tobacco juice onto the ties and shook his head. You should have kept quiet about what you saw that night. What Sorn Vell didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the approaching locomotive carried 15 men who owed their lives to Ridge Halver. Men who had not forgotten the debt they carried, men who were coming to collect. Stay with me until the end. What comes next isn't what they're expecting. 6 months earlier, Ridge Halver had been pacing the parade ground at Fort Huachuca, watching another batch of raw recruits stumble through their first week of cavalry scout training. At 63, his body bore the cost of 4 decades on the frontier. A shattered kneecap from Gettysburg left him limping when storms rolled in. 3 knife scars from a Comanche fight in '71 still burned when the cold settled deep. His hands, twisted by rope burns and frostbite, no longer closed the way they once had. But his mind remained as sharp as the saber he'd carried through the war. His eyes could still catch a broken twig or shifted stone from 100 yards away. For 22 years, Ridge Halver had served as chief scout instructor at Fort Huachuca, teaching young soldiers how to stay alive in unforgiving country. He'd learned the trade during the war, scouting for Sherman in Georgia, then refined it through 15 brutal years of frontier campaigns. The Army gave him something after the war, a reason to keep going when many of his brothers drank themselves into graves or chose a bullet over peace. The men he trained were more than soldiers. They were the sons he never had, the family he rebuilt from loss. His wife had died of cholera in 1867, taking their unborn child with her. He buried them outside Fort Clark in Texas and buried himself in work, teaching with the urgency of a man running from grief. Training became his anchor. He passed on hard-earned truths, lessons that could keep a man breathing in a land that killed the careless and the unlucky without mercy. He taught them that honor wasn't something printed on recruitment posters. It was a line you didn't cross, a rule that separated men from monsters. He taught them that loyalty meant holding ground even when retreat promised survival. He taught them to shoot clean, read tracks right, and never trust a canyon that looked peaceful. Above all, he taught them to think, to stay ahead of whatever wanted them dead. Those lessons saved lives, spreading across the frontier through former students who remembered Ridge Halver as the man who kept them alive when it counted. On the evening of March 15, 1878, Ridge Halver rode out from Fort Huachuca to visit his brother's grave in Tucson. Silas Halver had died 2 months earlier from pneumonia, and Ridge made the 50-mile ride once a month to tend the site. The route followed the old Butterfield stage road, a path usually safe enough for an armed man on a steady horse. His gray mare, Cinder, was 12 years old and smart enough to sense danger before he ever did. They'd been together 8 years, and Ridge trusted that horse more than most people he'd known. Just after midnight, Cinder's ears snapped forward and her stride tightened. Ridge's hand slid instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip. The moon, 3 days past full, lit the creosote flats in sharp silver. Ridge guided Cinder off the trail, moving silently through brush toward whatever had unsettled her. Years of scouting had burned patience into him. Men who rushed toward trouble didn't live long. He dismounted 50 yards from the road and continued on foot, his bad knee flaring but holding. That's when the shots cracked through the night. 3 quick bursts from a rifle, followed by the sharper bite of pistol fire. Ridge dropped behind a mesquite bush and watched the scene unfold below. A Butterfield stagecoach stood frozen in the trail, horses stamping nervously. The driver lay slumped across the boot, blood darkening his shirt. The shotgun guard lay sprawled in the dirt, his weapon useless at his side. 4 mounted men circled the coach, faces half-lit by moonlight, guns steady and ready. 4 riders closed in around the stagecoach, their outlines broken by moonlight and shadow. One of them swung down from his saddle, stormed to the coach door, tore it open, and dragged the passengers into the dirt. 2 men in tailored city suits stumbled out, followed by a woman in a travel dress who screamed, until one of the outlaws struck her hard enough to silence her. Recognition slammed into Ridge Halver like a blow to the chest. Seated tall on a heavy bay horse was Blaine Crowfax, deputy marshal of the territory. His badge gleamed faintly as he directed the robbery with calm, practiced authority. Crowfax had a reputation across the region. A firm lawman, the one credited with restoring order to Copper Ridge after the previous marshal was found dead with a knife buried between his ribs. The territorial governor himself had praised Crowfax, holding him up as proof that law still mattered in a land slipping toward chaos. But the man Ridge watched now bore nothing of that image. Crowfax dismounted and strode to the strongbox one of his men had pried loose from the rear of the coach. He raised his service revolver and fired once, blasting the lock apart. When he lifted the lid, stacks of banknotes lay inside, alongside leather sacks heavy with the unmistakable weight of gold. $42,000, Crowfax said, his voice carrying clean through the desert night. Split 4 ways, he added coolly. Better than 10 years pretending this badge means something. One of the passengers, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit, stepped forward, hands raised and shaking. "Marshal Crowfax, please," he pleaded. "You know me. I'm Byron Locke from the Territorial Bank. You don't have to do this. There's still time to walk away before this turns into murder." Crowfax answered him with a single shot to the head. The kill was swift, professional. Byron Locke collapsed without a sound, dropping like livestock at slaughter. The woman screamed again. The remaining man fell to his knees, begging through sobs that cracked with terror. Ridge's fingers tightened around the grip of his Colt. Every instinct drilled into him over decades screamed to act, to fire, to stop it. But experience overruled impulse. 4 armed men, 40 yards out, all alert, all angled toward his position. Even if he dropped 2 with the first shots, the others would cut him down before he could reload, and Cinder would bolt the instant gunfire erupted. Ridge had survived 40 years by knowing when to fight and when to watch. This was a moment for watching. He stayed still as Kroufax's men stripped the dead of watches, rings, and valuables. The woman they spared lived only because one of the outlaws, a thin man with a scar carved across his cheek, was silenced by a single cold glance from Kroufax. They strapped the strongbox to a pack horse and prepared to leave. Before mounting, Kroufax walked to the surviving woman, who sat slumped against the wheel in shock. He tore the marshal's badge from his coat and tossed it into the dirt at her feet. "Tell them Blaine Kroufax died here tonight," he said evenly. "Tell them Sornvell's crew killed everyone." He leaned closer. "You're the only witness. Get the story wrong, and my men will come back for you, and for anyone you care about." The woman nodded, unable to speak. Kroufax mounted up and led his riders northwest toward the Dragoon Mountains, into country where a man could vanish forever. Ridge stayed hidden for 20 long minutes after they disappeared, committing every detail to memory: the horses, the weapons, the voices, the order of events. Decades of survival had trained his mind to record what mattered. When he finally stepped from cover, the woman still sat in the dirt, staring through the world as if it no longer existed. Ridge identified himself as a civilian working with the army, and did what little he could to steady her. Words felt useless, but he helped her onto Cinder and walked beside them toward the main road. By sunrise, Ridge delivered her to the army post at Fort Lowell and gave a preliminary statement to the commanding officer. The woman, Elma Crossan, confirmed everything he had witnessed, though shock left her account broken and uncertain. Ridge's testimony, however, was exact, unshakable. By midday, he stood inside the chambers of Territorial Judge Eldon Merrick in Tucson, swearing an oath that would alter the course of many lives. Merrick, 72 years old and a former circuit judge from Missouri, listened in silence, the practiced focus of a man who had spent half a century weighing truth against lies. "You're certain it was Blaine Kroufax?" Merrick asked, pen hovering above the page. "As certain as my own name," Ridge answered. "I've met him twice. Once at a law conference at Fort Huachuca, once when he came through buying horses. I saw his face clearly. I heard his voice. I watched him execute Byron Locke without hesitation." Merrick wrote carefully, his aged hand steady despite a faint tremor. "You understand what this means, Mr. Halver," he said. "Kroufax is a decorated officer. He has allies in government, ranching, mining. If you're wrong, or if powerful men decide you're a liability, your life won't be worth a Confederate dollar." "I'm not wrong," Ridge replied evenly, "and I'm not afraid of powerful men." He held Merrick's gaze. "I watched better men than Kroufax die at Shiloh. I buried my wife and my child. I've tracked enemies through land that would kill most men in 3 days. Whatever comes of this," Ridge Halver said evenly, "I can live with it." Judge Eldon Merrick studied him in silence for a long moment, weighing the man as much as the words. At last, he gave a slow nod. "I believe you, Mr. Halver," he said, "and I'll issue warrants immediately for Blaine Kroufax and every associate we can name." Merrick leaned back, his expression hardening. "But understand, this won't be as simple as making arrests and holding a clean trial. Kroufax has spent 5 years building influence in Copper Ridge. He's made himself useful to people who carry real weight in this territory. They won't let him fall quietly," the judge continued, "and anyone who threatens that structure becomes a target. The warning proved accurate far sooner than either man expected. Within 48 hours of the warrants being signed, the threats began. The first arrived as a folded note slipped beneath the door of Ridge's temporary quarters at Fort Huachuca. The message was short and vicious. Old men should learn when to keep their mouths shut. Final warning. The scrawled handwriting left no doubt about its intent. Ridge reported it to the fort's provost marshal, but civilian matters fell outside military reach. All the Army could offer was protection while he remained on federal ground. Ridge was a civilian contractor, not an enlisted man. The moment he stepped beyond the fort's boundary, he stood alone. The second warning came louder. Late Tuesday morning, Ridge was inspecting the cavalry stables when a rifle cracked from the scrub hills east of the fort. The bullet tore past him, missing by no more than 3 feet, either a poor shot or a deliberate message. Fort sentries returned fire immediately, but by the time they reached the ridge, the shooter had vanished. That evening, Hugh Tolland, commander of Fort Huachuca, summoned Ridge to his office. Tolland was 48, a West Point man who'd fought at Antietam and spent the last decade keeping order in Apache country. He had once been Ridge's student, a Green lieutenant back in '56 who nearly died chasing a wounded Apache into a box canyon. "Ridge, I'm ordering you to take emergency leave," Tolland said without ceremony. "You're exposed. Whoever's hunting you knows your routines, your quarters, every step you take on this post. The trial isn't until May 15th. That gives them 2 full months to kill you," he added. "I can't run from this," Ridge replied, using Tolland's first name in the privacy of the room. "I testified. I gave my word to Judge Merrick." "And you plan to keep that word from a coffin?" Tolland asked, pulling a telegram from his desk. "I'm not telling you to run. I'm telling you to think." He slid the paper across the desk. "Your brother left you that ranch near the New Mexico line. Go there. Stay quiet. Stay alive long enough to put Crowfax in front of a jury. That's how you honor your word," Tolland said firmly. "Not by dying in an ambush because you refuse to take precautions." The logic was sound, even if it burned like acid in Ridge's gut. He had never backed away from a fight. But this wasn't a fight. It was assassination, murder from hiding, the kind that robbed a man of any chance to defend himself or die clean. Ridge accepted the order and requested 60 days' leave, planning to head for his late brother's property. Silas Halver had left the land to him in his will. 200 acres of marginal grazing ground, a small adobe house, a barn in need of repair. Isolated enough to make an ambush difficult, yet close enough to Tucson for Ridge to return when the trial came. He left Fort Huachuca before dawn on March 20th, telling only Tolland and one trusted clerk where he was headed. The ride north would take 3 days through hard country. But Ridge knew the land and trusted Cinder to carry him through it. He rode armed with his Colt, a Winchester, and enough ammunition to stand off a small war party if it came to that. The first 2 days passed without trouble. Ridge made camp in defensible spots, kept his fires low and cold, and watched constantly for signs of pursuit. On the 3rd day, while riding through a narrow cut known as Devil's Gate, he found the first warning. Fresh horse droppings on the trail ahead, no more than 6 hours old. At least 4 animals. He dismounted and studied the ground. 4 shod horses, moving at a walking pace. The tracks entered the canyon from the south and continued north. They were ahead of him. It could have been travelers, but Ridge's instincts told him otherwise. He guided Cinder off the trail and tucked them into a sheltered rise among the rocks, where he could observe the canyon unseen. Then he waited, motionless, patient, watching the shadows stretch as afternoon slid toward evening. An hour before sunset, voices echoed between the stone walls. 4 riders appeared from the northern bend, moving slow, careful, scanning the rocks like men searching for prey. Ridge recognized 2 immediately. One was Soren Vel, thin and sharp-featured, the scar on his cheek pale in the fading light. Beside him rode a stocky man with a thick black beard astride a distinctive pinto. The other 2 were strangers, but they wore the look of hired killers, men who worked for coin and slept well afterward. They were not ahead of him by chance. This was no coincidence. Someone had set the trap. Ridge Halver's route had been exposed, likely by someone at the fort with access to his movements. Ridge weighed his options quickly. He could turn back the way he'd come, adding days to the journey and risking another ambush along a different trail. Or he could wait for full darkness and try to slip past them through the canyon itself. Neither choice sat well with him, but retreat felt too much like surrender. And Ridge Halver had never been a man who surrendered easily. He chose the night. When the sun finally sank and shadows pooled between the canyon walls, Ridge listened as the men ahead made camp roughly 200 yards away. They lit a fire, careless, confident, a mistake that would steal their night vision. They laughed and settled in, like men convinced their prey would wander straight into their hands come morning. Ridge waited 2 full hours after nightfall. He let the moon climb higher and allowed his eyes to adjust until darkness became familiar terrain. Then he began to move. He led Cinder by the reins, guiding her step by step, careful to avoid loose stones and brittle brush. The mare moved like smoke, trusting his touch even when every instinct in her body urged her to flee the narrow, jagged path. They were nearly past the camp when one of the men rose from beside the fire and walked straight toward Ridge's position, fumbling with his trousers. He was no more than 30 yards away when Cinder shifted her weight. A single pebble clicked against stone. The sound was small, almost nothing. In the canyon's silence, it might as well have been thunder. The man froze. His hand slid toward the pistol on his hip. "Who's out there?" he called, tension cutting through his voice. Ridge decided in an instant. He couldn't outrun 4 mounted men in this terrain, and Cinder couldn't carry him at speed through the dark without risking a broken leg. That left only one choice: silence the threat before the alarm spread. He dropped the reins, trusting the mare to stay put, and moved forward in a low crouch. "I know someone's there," the man called again. "Show yourself." The pistol cleared the holster as the man turned. Ridge closed the distance to 15 yards before he was spotted, just a darker shadow sliding along the canyon wall. The ambusher raised his weapon. Ridge was faster. The Colt cracked once. The muzzle flash burned white in the dark. The man staggered backward, his own pistol firing wildly into the air as he fell. The echo ricocheted off the canyon walls, exploding into chaos. Shouts erupted. Boots scrambled. Horses screamed. Ridge didn't wait to see if the shot had finished the job. He was already moving, grabbing Cinder's reins and driving her hard down the canyon. Behind him came confusion, men shouting orders, weapons being grabbed, horses being mounted. The ambush had collapsed into disorder. He'd bought himself maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes wouldn't be enough. The canyon tightened ahead, stone walls closing in, no side paths, no cover. Cinder was breathing hard now, strained by the pace and the dark footing. Ridge slowed just as he heard it, the unmistakable thunder of multiple horses coming fast from ahead. More riders. Another blocking force, or worse. Ridge hauled Cinder behind a boulder and brought up his Winchester. If this was where it ended, then it would end on his feet, not running. He would take as many with him as he could. The riders rounded the bend, moonlight outlining them in sharp relief. Ridge counted them automatically. 15. They rode in formation, tight, disciplined. No outlaw gang moved like that. "These aren't ambushers," Ridge muttered. The lead rider raised a hand. "Hold your fire, Mr. Halver," the man called out. "This is Orrin Blackery, Fort Huachuca." Relief slammed into Ridge so hard, his hands shook as he lowered the rifle. Orrin Blackery, 32 years old. One of the finest scouts Ridge had ever trained. A man who could read sign on bare rock and hit a moving target at 300 yards. The riders fanned out, securing the canyon as Blackery dismounted, his face tight in the moonlight. "Sir," Blackery said, "we received word of a planned ambush. Jed Rusk was in Tucson 3 days ago and overheard 2 men talking in a saloon. We rode hard to cut them off. Behind them, the remaining ambushers were scrambling to mount up, trying to flee back down the canyon." Blackery turned and flashed a series of sharp hand signals, commands Ridge himself had taught years earlier. Instantly, the Iron 15 moved as one body. They split into 3 units, sealing both ends of the canyon and taking the high ground. The fight was over in less than 4 minutes. The ambushers realized too late they were trapped. 3 threw down their weapons and surrendered. The 4th, the stocky man with the black beard, tried to force his way through the northern line and paid for it with a rifle round that spun him from the saddle. A rifle round tore through the man's shoulder, dropped cleanly by Jed Rusk's shot. Moonlight caught the blood as he fell. Ridge Halver's hands were still shaking as he checked the cylinder of his Colt, though he couldn't tell whether it was the rush of adrenaline or the aftershock settling in. Orrin Blackery stepped in close and gripped Ridge's shoulder, a quiet gesture that needed no explanation. Around them, the Iron 15 moved with steady precision, disarming prisoners and binding hands without wasted motion. "How did you know to come?" Ridge asked, though the answer was already forming in his mind. "Word travels," Blackery replied, "especially among men you trained. When Jed Rusk heard 2 strangers talking about an ambush on Devil's Gate Road, he knew exactly who they were hunting. He wired Fort Huachuca, and Hugh Tolland authorized an extended patrol under the cover of tracking Apache raiders." "Apache raiders," Ridge repeated, understanding the convenient fiction. "Yes, sir," Blackery said evenly. "Dangerous ones. We've been tracking them for 3 days. Just happened to catch them here." His face stayed straight, but his eyes told a different story. Respect, resolve, and the fierce pride of a student repaying a debt. Ridge looked around at the 15 men encircling him. He knew every face. These weren't just soldiers pulled at random. They were men he had trained himself. Men who had taken his lessons about loyalty and honor and decided that protecting their instructor was worth risking their careers. Jed Rusk approached, leading Cinder, who had wandered during the fight. The big sergeant, 41 years old and thick-chested with campaign ribbons across his coat, handed over the reins. "Your mare's fine, sir," Rusk said, spooked but not hurt. Ridge ran a steadying hand along Cinder's neck. "I reckon I owe you men more than I can ever pay." Rusk answered without hesitation. "You don't owe us a thing." He met Ridge's eyes. "You taught us loyalty isn't something you say. It's something you do. Tonight we proved we learned." They made camp in the canyon, setting watches and tending the wounded prisoner. Under questioning by Orrin Blackery, the man with the shattered shoulder confirmed Ridge's darkest suspicions. The ambush had been ordered by Blaine Crowfax himself. He'd worked through intermediaries with ties inside Fort Huachuca. Money had changed hands. Information had been leaked. 4 hired killers had been placed to erase the only witness who could tie Koufax to the Stagecoach murders. For the next 6 weeks leading up to the trial, Ridge remained at Fort Huachuca under what amounted to constant protection, though no one ever used the word custody. His 15 guardians rotated shifts, but were never far away. When Ridge oversaw training drills, at least 3 of them were present. When he ate in the officers' mess, 2 always sat nearby. When he walked back to his quarters at night, shapes moved quietly in the darkness. Men positioned to intercept danger before it reached him. Even so, death came looking twice more. The first attempt arrived as a bottle of whiskey delivered to his quarters with routine supplies. Ike Fenroe, suspicious by nature from a hard childhood in Boston, insisted on testing it on a camp dog before Ridge touched it. The animal was dead within the hour. An investigation traced the bottle back to a Tucson merchant paid $500 by an unknown middleman. The second attempt was cleaner and deadlier. A sniper set up on the hills overlooking the parade ground during morning formation. One shot cracked past Ridge's head, missing by inches. Jed Rusk, scanning the ridgeline out of habit, spotted the muzzle flash and called it out. The position was found, but the shooter was gone, escaping on a fast horse, leaving only spent brass and boot prints that led nowhere. On April 20th, Judge Eldon Merrick came to the fort to review Ridge's testimony and prepare for trial. He looked worn, older than his 72 years, carrying the weight of a case that had turned dangerous for everyone involved. 3 witnesses have withdrawn statements about Koufax's other crimes, Merrick said quietly inside Hugh Tollin's office. They were threatened. Their families were threatened. They chose survival over justice. I don't blame them. He paused. I have a daughter in Tucson myself. I've received letters describing what might happen to her if this trial goes forward. But you're still proceeding, Ridge said. It wasn't a question. I am, Merrick replied. Because if men like Blaine Koufax are allowed to rot our courts from the inside, then law and order mean nothing on this frontier. He leaned forward. Your testimony is the backbone of this case, Mr. Halver. Without it, Koufax walks free and 4 murdered passengers are forgotten. The trial was set for May 15th in Copper Ridge. The decision unsettled everyone. Holding court in Koufax's own territory felt like inviting bloodshed, but Merrick insisted the law required it. On May 10th, Ridge and the Iron 15 rode out from Fort Huachuca toward Copper Ridge, a 3-day journey through increasingly hostile ground. They traveled as a full cavalry patrol, disciplined and armed, moving in defensive formation. Ridge rode at the center, guarded on all sides as the frontier closed in around them. They advanced with protection on every flank, while scouts rode ahead, reading the land for signs of danger. The first day passed quietly. On the second, Orrin Blackery's outriders returned with troubling news. No fewer than a dozen riders were shadowing them from a distance. These weren't travelers drifting the road. They moved with intent, holding their spacing like wolves pacing injured game. Blackery called a halt and gathered his men, his voice low but firm as he laid out the plan. They're waiting for us to slip, he said. For a mistake, we don't give them one. We hold formation, stay sharp, and keep moving. Ridge Halver stays in the center at all times. If anyone closes within 100 yards, he continued, we challenge once. After that, we fire. That night's camp was tight with tension. Rifles stayed within reach. Horses kept saddled. Ridge took the midnight watch beside Jed Rusk, both men scanning the darkness for movement. They'll make their move before we reach Copper Ridge, Rusk murmured. Tomorrow, most likely, close enough to strike and scatter before help arrives. Rusk was right. The ambush came the following afternoon as the column crossed a dry riverbed 3 miles outside town. Ridge was halfway through the sand when rifle fire erupted from the high ground, bullets snapping and throwing dust around the horses. Blackery reacted instantly. "Dismount! Defensive perimeter! Return fire!" The Iron 15 moved as one. Horses were pulled to cover, riflemen dropped into position, and within moments the traveling column hardened into a fortified line. Ridge counted at least 20 rifles firing down at them. The attackers had numbers, but no discipline. They'd expected panic. Instead, they faced trained soldiers hardened by fights in country just like this. Men who understood angles, cover, and coordinated fire. The exchange dragged on for nearly 20 minutes. The cavalry's marksmanship told the story quickly. Every attacker who showed himself drew concentrated return fire. 2 tried to break away, and were cut down cleanly by Thorne Kestrel and Ike Fenroe, firing in perfect rhythm. Then Orrin Blackery made the call that ended it. "Mount up! Charge!" It was bold, dangerous, completely unexpected. The 15 soldiers swung into the saddle, sabers flashing as they drove uphill at full gallop, voices raised in a feral scream. The effect shattered the attacker's nerve. Horses scattered. Men ran, abandoning the wounded as they fled on foot. No one followed. They reached Copper Ridge by sundown, riding down Main Street as the mountains burned red behind them. The town fell silent. Doors paused mid-swing. Conversations died as 15 armed soldiers escorted one older man toward the courthouse. Eldon Merrick met them on the steps, relief clear on his lined face. "Mr. Halver, Lieutenant Blackery, thank God you arrived intact. We've had developments." Inside, away from listening ears, Merrick spoke heavily. "Blaine Crowfax escaped the Tucson jail 4 days ago. Killed 2 guards. He hasn't been seen since. There's a manhunt underway," the judge continued. "But I believe he's already here, or close. Desperate men take desperate actions." Ridge felt the weight settle in his chest. A cornered Crowfax was far more dangerous than one still hiding behind power. "The trial goes on?" Ridge asked, though he already knew. "It does," Merrick said. "His escape changes nothing for his accomplices, and your testimony remains essential. Every available lawman will be inside the courthouse tomorrow. The Army will secure the perimeter." Merrick held Ridge's gaze. "Crowfax knows he's finished if his men turn on him. He has every reason to stop this trial at any cost." That night, Ridge slept little in the hotel room secured by his guardians. Orrin Blackery posted men in the hall and outside the window, turning the building into a fortress wrapped in civilian walls. Ridge lay awake, listening to Copper Ridge breathe after dark. Saloon pianos drifting through open doors, drunken laughter, the distant crack of a gunshot that might have been celebration or murder. Tomorrow, he would testify. Tomorrow, he would look the families of the dead in the eye and speak the truth. Tomorrow, justice would stand, if any of them lived long enough to see it. Morning broke on May 15th beneath a brutal sun, heat already pressing down with the promise of triple digits. Ridge dressed carefully in his best clothes. A black suit worn since the war, a white shirt sewn by his late wife. Preparing to step into the final reckoning. The string tie was the one Silas Halver had given him for Christmas back in '75. Ridge adjusted it carefully, then checked his coat one last time. 6 rounds loaded instead of the usual 5. He had learned long ago that courtrooms could be as dangerous as battlefields. A knock sounded at exactly 7. Orrin Blackery stood in the doorway. "Ready, sir?" Ridge settled his hat into place. As ready as a man ever gets. They descended into the lobby where the rest of his protectors waited. The Iron 15 closed ranks around him, forming a tight moving box as they stepped into the street and began the 3-block walk to the courthouse. Copper Ridge was already packed. Main Street buzzed with spectators drawn from across the territory, all hoping to witness the fall of the legendary lawman Blaine Crowfax. Except Crowfax wasn't in chains. He was still out there somewhere, watching, calculating, waiting. The trial opened precisely at 9. Eldon Merrick's courtroom was wide and sunlit, tall windows flooding the room with light and danger. Territorial marshals were posted at every opening, eyes sweeping rooftops and alleys for the glint of a rifle barrel. The prosecution called its first witness, Elma Crossan. She took the stand pale and shaking, hands trembling as she swore the oath. Her voice wavered, but it never broke. She described the robbery, identified 3 of the men at the defense table, and stated plainly that Blaine Crowfax had commanded the attack. The defense pressed hard, suggesting fear, shock, poor lighting, mistaken identity. Elma Crossan stood firm. "I wasn't mistaken," she said quietly. "I watched Marshal Crowfax kill Byron Locke from 3 feet away. I'll remember his face for the rest of my life." 3 more witnesses followed before noon. The case was strong, but not yet unshakable. Everything rested on Ridge. During the lunch recess, he sat alone in a side room, food untouched, reviewing his statement one final time. At 1 o'clock sharp, the bailiff called the court back to order. The prosecution calls Ridge Halver to the stand. Ridge rose, walked forward with steady purpose, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore the oath. He faced a packed courtroom and began. He laid out the night of March 15th, piece by piece, time, place, weather, distance. He described where he'd been positioned, how he'd observed the scene. He detailed each man involved, their horses, their weapons, their voices. He described Blaine Crowfax's face under the moonlight, the precise motion of the revolver, the way the body fell, the casual flick of the badge into the dirt. The courtroom was silent. This wasn't guesswork. It was the account of a man trained to notice what others missed, a man who had spent 40 years surviving by remembering details that kept him alive. Even the defense attorney seemed caught by the clarity of it. After 30 minutes, the prosecutor stepped back. The defense rose. Ferris Dent approached with confidence that lasted less than 5 minutes. He questioned Ridge's eyesight, his memory, his motives, his distance from the crime. Each line of attack was calmly dismantled. When Dent suggested the moonlight had been insufficient, Ridge described the lunar phase, the lack of cloud cover, and the angle at which the light struck Crowfax's face. The cross-examination unraveled. Dent grasped for anything: military service, employment, personal history. But Ridge remained unshaken. War and wilderness had taught him how to stay calm when pressed. Finally, Dent exhaled sharply. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Eldon Merrick turned to the prosecution. "Redirect?" "No, Your Honor," the prosecutor replied. "The witness has been entirely clear." Merrick nodded. "Very well. Mr. Halver, you may step down. The court thanks you for your service." Ridge turned from the stand. He'd done it. He was halfway down the aisle toward Orrin Blackery when the courthouse doors exploded inward. Blaine Crowfax stormed inside with a revolver in each hand. The room dissolved into panic. Women screamed. Men dove for cover. Marshals reached for weapons. Crowfax fired once into the ceiling, plaster raining down. "Nobody move." His eyes locked onto Ridge. "You ruined my life, old man." He leveled both guns. Time to return the favor. Ridge stood frozen in the aisle. Nowhere to run. Nothing between him and death. 20 feet away, Blaine Crowfax's revolvers were aimed straight at his chest. The former marshal looked like a man scraped raw by days on the run. His beard was wild, eyes bloodshot, clothes caked with dust and darkened by the blood of the guards he'd killed during his escape. "You think this is victory?" Blaine Crowfax snarled. "You think words in a courtroom can erase what I built?" "I was this territory," he shouted. "I was the law when there was no law. And you, an old cavalry instructor past his prime. You think you can tear me down with testimony?" Orrin Blackery shifted slowly toward his sidearm. Crowfax's head snapped toward him. "Don't even try it, Lieutenant. I see one weapon move. Ridge Halver dies first. Then I empty both pistols into the crowd." Judge Eldon Merrick rose from the bench, voice steady but urgent. "Blaine, this ends badly if you continue. You're surrounded. Every lawman in Copper Ridge is converging on this courthouse," Merrick said. "Surrender now, and I will guarantee you a fair trial." Crowfax laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "A fair trial?" he spat. "We both know how this ends, Judge. I hang, or I take Halver and half this room with me." Before Ridge could move, a voice cut through the chaos. "Papa, please stop." It was a woman's voice, clear, firm, trembling only slightly. Crowfax turned. Standing in the doorway was a young woman in a plain dress, no weapon in sight. She shared his sharp features, his eyes. "Nell," Crowfax said hoarsely, "what are you doing here?" Nell Crowfax stepped forward, hands raised. "I came to hear the truth," she said, "to understand what you'd done and why." "I heard about the escape," she continued. "I stayed because I hoped you wouldn't come." Tears streaked her cheeks, but her voice held. "I didn't have a choice," Crowfax said, his revolvers lowering a fraction. "He ruined everything." "So you chose murder," Nell said, her voice breaking. "You killed innocent people." She shook her head. "That's not the father I knew." Crowfax's hands trembled. "I did it for you," he whispered. "Everything I did was for you." Nell stepped closer. "Then do one last thing for me." She held his gaze. "Put the guns down. Surrender. Don't make me watch you die with more blood on your hands. Please, Papa. Let it end." The revolvers slipped from Crowfax's fingers and clattered across the courtroom floor. He dropped to his knees as territorial marshals rushed forward, clamping iron shackles around his wrists. Judge Merrick brought the gavel down hard. "Order. Order in this court." Ridge Halver retired from Fort Huachuca in June of 1883 at the age of 68. His body had paid the price of a lifetime in hard country. The limp from Gettysburg worsened. Old nerve damage left his hands shaking. His eyesight dimmed enough that teaching marksmanship became difficult. He moved to Silas Halver's ranch near the New Mexico border and spent his remaining years raising horses and writing his memoir. Published in 1887 as Frontier Training, Lessons from a Life on the Border, the book became required reading at multiple military academies and shaped Army Scout doctrine for decades. The Iron 15 stayed in touch through letters and visits. Orrin Blackery, later promoted to major, named his firstborn son Ridge, in honor of the man who taught him the true meaning of loyalty. Jed Rusk retired in 1885 and became marshal of a small New Mexico town, earning a reputation for unbreakable integrity. The others scattered across the frontier, carrying Ridge's lessons wherever they went. Ridge Halver died peacefully in his sleep on November 12, 1891, at the age of 76. He was buried beside his brother Silas, with full military honors from Fort Huachuca. More than 300 people attended. Soldiers he had trained, lives he had shaped, men and women who understood what he had stood for amid the chaos of the frontier. Honor, loyalty, justice, even when the cost was high. The Arizona Territorial Legislature passed a resolution recognizing his service. But Ridge's true memorial was never carved in stone. It lived on in the choices made by the men he trained. In moments when someone faced a hard decision and remembered his lesson, loyalty isn't measured by words. It's measured by who shows up when the train is coming. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths. Some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.